Why a car that should fight for victories becomes a nightmare every time the asphalt exceeds 40 degrees. What technical decisions are destroying Ferrari races when the temperature rises? Today I explain it to you. Ferrari did not enter 2025 as another team. It was, together with McLaren, one of the main contestants to the title after a solid season 2024. With the arrival of Lewis Hamilton and the technical strengthening of the Maranello team, a resurrection narrative was consolidated. The seven-time champion arrived hungry, experience and a clear ambition to return Ferrari to the top. Everything pointed to this year would be different. The SF-25 car, presented with optimism for its engineers, promised a new era for the red team. However, in just 3 races, that dream began to crack brutally. And the most disconcerting is that the key to that debacle was not the lack of pure rhythm, but the sun. When the track is literally heated, the Ferrari breaks down. There is no other word. In Australia, with temperatures that touched the 45 degrees in the asphalt, the car began to show symptoms of a deep structural problem. Thermal degradation was not only aggressive, it was destructive. The brakes overheated, the tires collapsed, and the engineers were forced to ask their pilots to raise their foot from the accelerator in the straight line. Lift and coast, a phrase that in other equipment is used in strategic moderation, became a permanent mantra inside the Ferrari garage. Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton did not pilot to attack, they piloted to survive. To understand why the SF-25 becomes an indomitable car under the heat, you have to go beyond the aerodynamic surface and explore the bowels of the car. Ferrari did not build a bad car, but one with an unbalanced thermal architecture. In their attempt to evolve aggressively with respect to SF-24, Maranello engineers made a series of radical changes in the chassis and suspension, seeking to maximize the classification performance. The most emblematic and also more controversial change was the passage of a pushrod front suspension to a pull rod configuration. This modification, although popular among some teams for its impact on the center of gravity and aerodynamics of the air flow under the nose, introduced a series of unexpected challenges in heat management. The new suspension forced an internal redistribution of components, particularly the cooling system. This directly affected the way in which the heat generated in the brakes and the front ducts is dissipated along the car. Instead of facilitating thermal evacuation, the current configuration concentrates heat in critical areas, causing it to accumulate in the brakes, axles, and tire chambers. In classification sessions, this accumulation may seem beneficial. The tires quickly reach their 100-degree operational window. But in a long race, that accumulation becomes a slow and implacable poison. The most immediate consequence of this design is that Ferrari is forced to close the brake ducts to keep heat for a quick lap. This apparently logical strategy becomes a thermal trap during long batches. As the ambient temperature rises and the stint lengthens, the brakes begin to suffer progressive overheating. The heat, instead of dissipating, is encapsulated in the system and raises the temperature of the discs, of the tweezers, and finally of the tires. This thermal excess causes aggressive degradation, especially in rear tires, which lose adherence prematurely. From that point, the car becomes difficult to stop, rotate, and accelerate precisely. The SF-25 begins to skid, to suffer graining, and losing seconds in each lap. Telemetry data reveals a clear pattern. Under conditions of more than 35 degrees on the track, Ferrari needs to constantly apply lift and coast strategies to control temperature peaks. This means that both Leclerc and Hamilton should release the accelerator up to 100 meters before the usual braking point, sacrificing speed, rhythm, and attack possibilities. And this measure of containment not only slows the car, but also completely alters the career strategy. Ferrari cannot afford to press the opponent or risk undercuts, because any aggressive maneuver implies a thermal cost that could leave the car inoperable in a few laps. The paradox of this car is clear. To be competitive in classification, it needs to be thermally inefficient in the race. That is the true tragedy of the SF-25. The design has created a dichotomy impossible to reconcile without compromising one of the two ends. Ferrari has no margin, or sacrifices classification or sacrifices career. In both cases he loses, and that, in Formula One modern, is a competitive death sentence. The thermal problem of the SF-25 is not theoretical or marginal. It has had a real, direct, and devastating impact on Ferrari's results during the 2025 season. And it has not only affected its pilots from the point of view of pure performance, but also from the strategic approach, the reaction capacity during the race, and the internal moral of the team. To understand the seriousness of this situation, it is enough to review what happened in some of the first quotes of the calendar. starting with Australia, following China, and projecting what comes in stages such as Bahrain and Hungary. Albert Park was the first great alert. During free training, the car showed competitive rhythm on a return, but a few long batches with a track temperature above 40 degrees Celsius were enough for the symptoms to begin to appear. The wear of the rear tires shot, and the car began to slide in each slow curve. Lewis Hamilton, in his official debut with Ferrari, suffered a continuous loss of performance after the first stop. His aggressive style, characterized by entering strong curve and maintaining minimal speed, became incompatible with the need to keep brakes and tires in an overheated environment. Leclerc, on the other hand, was more conservative, but ended up being committed to being forced to reduce his rhythm by orders of the wall, which asked to maintain stable temperature margins in the brake system. In the race, both SF25 entered a descending spiral. Without attack or defense capacity, and forced to lengthen the braking and avoid traffic, they became easy dams for the McLaren and the Mercedes. Instead of fighting for the podium as projected at the beginning of the weekend, Hamilton ended just adding a point, while Leclerc remained in an improper middle zone of a factory car with aspirations to the title. The message was clear: Ferrari could not run in heat conditions without self-destructing from the inside. The situation worsened in Tour 14, when Leclerc, less than a second from Russell, was called to the box before planned because the front brake system reached 110-degree peaks. A dangerous temperature that not only limits performance, but compromises the safety of the car. This advanced stop broke its ideal strategy, left it in traffic, and from there his career was survival. Hamilton suffered a similar pattern a few laps later. The car was competitive at times, but every long stint under pressure ended with overheating that forced him to retreat. These incidents are not isolated cases, but part of a pattern. The team has begun to program career simulations with defensive strategies since Friday, anticipating that the car will not be able to sustain offensive rhythm for more than 8 or 10 laps in a row under heat. This tactical resignation is an unequivocal sign that the problem is structural, not circumstantial. And most worrying, the worst is yet to come. The calendar includes scenarios such as Bahrain, Hungary, and Mexico, all known for their very high environmental temperatures and abrasive asphalt. Circuits that, historically, have demanded an impeccable thermal equilibrium in the brakes, the tires, and the ERS system. If Ferrari does not find a quick solution, the car could be out of contest in a large part of the championship, condemning their pilots to a secondary role and forcing the team to think about the development of SF26 ahead of time. The case of SF25 is one of the clearest examples of how a strategic technical decision can condemn an entire project in Formula One modern. In a category where the differences are measured in thousands and the margins of error are almost non-existent, the slightest imbalance in the thermal architecture of the car can climb until it becomes a nightmare without a short-term solution. Ferrari has built a car that, on paper, has speed, aerodynamic, and potential stability to compete in classification. But that promise fades every time the weather imposes its law. In the obsessive search to gain time on a return, the thermal balance of the entire system was pledged. And in an era where energy management, heat dissipation, and consistency in long steins are more important than ever, that choice is paid with blood. What should have been a season of consolidation, recovery of pride, and real struggle for the championship is becoming an uphill race, with engineers fighting a thermal storm for which they have no umbrella. The SF25, more than a competition machine, has become an impossible equation. Ferrari is not only losing points, he is wasting time, trust, and narrative. Each race in which McLaren and Mercedes add up without thermal impediments while Ferrari survives, is one in which the fight for the title becomes more a fantasy than a possibility. The pilots also suffer the consequences. Lewis Hamilton arrived in Maranello with the hope of a last great stage, a final chapter of redemption with the most iconic rack of motoring. Instead, a car has been found that requires him to sacrifice his style and adapt to a technically limited environment. Charles Leclerc, on the other hand, lives a bitter déjà vu. Once again, a Ferrari project catches it between the personal talent and the structural lacks of the team. The question about the table is painful but necessary. Can Ferrari save his season? Or are we facing another chapter in the long history of technical decisions that end up costing championships? There is time, but the margin is narrow. And if radical decisions are not made, if the engineering approach with urgency is not restructured, the SF25 will go down in history not as the car that took Ferrari back to the top, but as the one that buried a golden opportunity for not knowing how to manage heat. And here the reflection is open. Is it worth sacrificing thermal reliability for performance on a return? Can a team allow that luxury in the current Formula One? Or will this strategic error be an expensive lesson that will mark the way to a more prudent future in Maranello?